Hi everyone, and welcome back to the second part of the planning the macro cycle for the cross-country season. We're going to be looking closely at the general preparation phase. This is the phase that sets the table for everything else in your cross-country season. It's what really gets going. Possibly at the end of the May in Florida where I'm at, our state meets a little bit earlier. So for most of you, it'll be more like June, July, August. This is your summer training. This is what really just sets the table for that more intense work that's going to happen later on. So everything starts here. So a lot of the workouts you could say are a little bit more simple, a little bit more single-minded in what you're trying to accomplish, but just because something is simple doesn't mean it's not important. And in fact, you start this first because of the time frames you need, but also because of the importance that this is for your cross-country race. We're going to obviously focus on the 5K here because I'm a high school coach, but for any of the races you might do, maybe it's a 3K if you're coaching middle school, or 8K, 10K, 6K if you're dealing with college, or just some other different type of distance. This is what sets the table for everything else you're going to do later on, so we're going to start with it. In this video, we're going to look a little bit at just what is the general preparation phase, how long it'll take, some of the demands of the 5K, and why you're going to do these workouts now, and also give you a glimpse at some of the workouts that we're going to talk about in detail in further workouts. So let's get right to it. I'm Kyle Giacono. I'm the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida. I just completed my 7th year as the track coach, and this will be my 7th year as the cross country coach, to give you an idea of how long I've been with the school, and some of my other credentials are there on the screen. So really important to always consider before you start planning out for success in a race is to look at the metrics. What makes the race what it actually is? So for the 5K, if we look at this study, there was a really extensive study that was first published in 2008, and it's been kind of bared out in subsequent studies that was done by Ingham. And what they found after looking at this for a very long time, this was a longitudinal study, when they looked at the 5K, they wanted to see in a bunch of different races, not just the 5K, why did certain people win the race and certain people not win the race? And they found that the single biggest predictor of who won the 5K was who had the best VO2 max, who had the stronger, most developed aerobic system in all respects, who could run fastest aerobically, essentially. So the percent of who had the better VO2 max was 94.3%. So obviously in the 5K, we're going to figure out how to maximize this, and it starts in the general preparation phase. From the USATF distance curriculum, we'll find that the 5K is run very close to VO2 max, or 2-mile pace, 97%. So it's very linked to success in the 3,200 meter or the 2-mile. And then the energy supply, this was a study that was published not that long ago by Dr. Matter and Hartman. They worked closely with the IAAF, and what they found is in the 5K that 4% of the energy came from the ATP just sitting in your muscles before you start, and then the phosphocreatine, or usually called in this country the creatine phosphate or the alactic system, supplied 4% of the energy. Anaerobic glycolytic, the longer, slightly less powerful speed system that eventually causes jelly leg feeling and acidosis, or acid, to develop in your muscles, supplies 10% of the energy. And not surprisingly, because of how long this race is, the aerobic system is taking the lion's share of the energy, 86%. So that gives us an idea of what we have to work on, these 3 energy systems, focusing here on how to maximize VO2 max for most success in this. But there's obviously some wiggle room here, and that's going to come in with these other energy systems that we do not want to neglect. 14% of the race is obviously not as big as 86%, but it's still, you don't want to just throw away 14% of anything. I mean, obviously, if we were dealing this in school, if we were perfect here, we would still only get a B. And we don't want to get a B. We want to win this race. We want to win the sucker. So we got to figure out how to best move all these things around. So energy systems and peaking time frames. So of those 3 systems we just talked about, what does it take to peak these systems? And this will set up our timetable. So the aerobic system, as we said, contributes 86% of the energy of the 5K at race pace, right? If somebody just goes out and walks a 5K or just jogs, goes very slowly, they'll supply 100% or very, very close to 100%, maybe 99% of the energy with their aerobic system, but you're not going to get any race success. So all these percentages are at race pace or race pace type effort. So at race pace. So improvements in this system, the aerobic system, they require your body to change its structures. How is the body shaped, right? Some of those changes are getting a bigger heart, building more blood vessels, increasing mitochondria, producing these structures inside your cells. So these are all very structurally based improvements. So body changes take time, so to maximize the aerobic system, these improvements require 20+ weeks of training. That's why you start this first over the summertime, and we'll explain this a little bit more in a subsequent slide. So we just said the anaerobic alactic system supplies 4% of the energy system. This is the same thing as the phosphocreatine system, as I was mentioning before, at race pace. Improvements in this system require increases in strength, right? This is the fastest pace a human being can run. It's why at the very beginning of your race you feel like you can just do anything, like you're Superman, Superwoman, because this system is the fastest resupplier of ATP, but it's very short-lived. It's the beginning of the race and the final surge. So improvements in this require increases in strength in the working muscles, okay? So this is including, some of the strengths include elastic strength, right, the stretch shortening cycle. One of the interesting things about people that have a really well-developed stretch shortening cycle is they're going to supply somewhere between 10 and even up to 30% of the energy in the race that's almost completely free, right, for each step. So 30% of the muscle energy, or the energy that they're using in the stretch shortening cycle, is not muscle based. It's simply the spring back of their muscle, and that comes with elasticity, and there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Also, when you practice this system, it's just practicing the recruitment of muscle fibers over and over again, and that takes practice, and muscle synchronization. How well do your muscles fire as you're recruiting them, and that takes practice. Improvements come from retraining the central nervous system, right? So there's different types of strength, but these three that we're talking about here are central nervous system based. So it's not about getting big and bulky and adding weight that's going to hurt a distance runner. It's about training your central nervous system, your brain, spinal cord, all the different nerves, to fire more quickly so that your muscles can be more elastic, they're going to be recruited faster and more synchronized way. And this also requires a lot of time. And I'm going to say undefined because you can train this system throughout the entire year. You'll see that even though the aerobic system is king, this system should also be trained in the general preparation phase too, because of the amount of time it takes. It takes years to really fully train this to work at its maximum. And then the last energy system, anaerobic glycolytic, contributes 10% of the energy system in the 5K at race pace, so it's the second biggest contributor, so it's very important. Improvements in the system require changes in body biochemistry, right? So improvements here in the aerobic system were structurally based. Here they're based on increasing strengths in the working muscle and the central nervous system. Here we're dealing with biochemistry, and that's what's going to change everything about training this system, okay? Some of these changes are cell membrane composition. So can your body, when you're building acid in your cells, can it get rid of the acid more quickly? That's changes in your cell membrane from being exposed to acid at certain levels. And also, other cells that use acid for its own energy system, cell membranes allowing more of the acid to come in so it can use it for its own energy system. Also, the storing of different products that can neutralize acid, like sodium bicarbonate. Hemoglobin is actually what's on your blood, is a base type product. So storing different things that would neutralize acid, different things that, like sodium bicarbonate, you might take for heartburn or an upset stomach because of acid. It can also be stored in your cells to neutralize acid as you're being exposed to it, and as you're exposed to it more, your body can store this, right? And increase enzyme activity of anaerobic enzymes that produce energy with glycogen. That's what glycolytic means, with glycolysis, without oxygen, increasing the enzymes there. Okay, these improvements take time, no doubt, but they require about half the time of the aerobic system improvements, right? So 9 to 11 weeks here, we're talking 20 plus weeks. For perfect, it would be anywhere from maybe up to 25, 26 weeks for the aerobic system. The hypothetical macrocycle I have set up here gives us 23 to the state meet, so that's right in the middle here. Here, we're dealing with 9 to 11 weeks, and then you can hold a peak for 2 to maybe 3 weeks, but the peak here is much more based on the kid. I had a really fantastic runner years ago. Was a 9:17 2-miler, was top 10 in the state in cross country 3 straight years, a 15-minute 5K kid, currently running at a Division I program and doing very well there. But his peaking window was narrow, right? He had about a 10-day to 2-week peak, and I knew that with him just from years going through it. We have a kid this year who seems to have a bigger peak. He's kind of close to that other kid. I was just mentioning the kid that we still have is also a 15-minute 5K, 9:20s in the 2 mile as a junior. But he seems to be able to hold his anaerobic peak a little bit longer. Now, the second kid's a little bit faster than the first kid I was telling you about, hypothetically. when we did a 400-meter test on him earlier this year, he was in the 52s for a 400, which is really good for a 2-miler. So this is much more, there's a lot more questions here. So obviously, you need to start this early, but not nearly as early as over here. So this is going to play into our time frame here of 20-plus weeks, undefined, so you have to do this often throughout the year, and then 9 to 11 weeks. So that's going to change a lot of this. All right, so we talked about VO2 max being the biggest thing. We know that VO2 max has to do with the aerobic system. So how can we improve the VO2 max if it is the single biggest indicator of success? We need more myoglobin. We'll talk about this in subsequent videos, but this is what's on your working muscles that pull the oxygen off your blood. You're going to get more aerobic enzymes, more and bigger mitochondria, red blood cell improvement so they can do a better job of moving the oxygen throughout the body. Bigger heart, left ventricle, these are some of the things we talked about previously. Increased muscle capillarization, more blood vessels, more overall blood, and the athlete's going to get older, so you do have to account for that. In a cross-country season, you're going to get 5-6 months older, so something that they might be able to handle at certain parts of the season, VO2 max-wise, will change as they get older. Right, and we already mentioned this. Adaptations improving the aerobic system are structural in nature and require a lot of time.
This is where the fun begins.
So let's take a look at this calendar for this fictitious macrocycle that I was just talking about. So this is if I were planning a fictitious macrocycle in a normal year in Florida, and you can kind of take this and project it out for what you have in your situation. Now, obviously with the coronavirus, we're not allowed to do anything with our kids until we get the all clear from our state. Our school year would end typically right here on the 29th of May. So the next school year and the next training cycle would start on June 1st typically. So all that being put into play, it might change things for you, but the reason for that is when I planned out 23 weeks to peak, my state meet here in Florida is on the 7th of November. So you may need to change that around for your situation. I talked about this in a previous video that's in the description down below that talks about the whole season kind of in general. We're just looking here at general prep. So ideally, you need about 10% of the year off for a high school kid to be successful. They need to have time off to succeed. They need to have time off to succeed, right? So you need to give them about 10% of the year, which is about 6 weeks, right? 5 to 6 weeks. I like to do it in 2 separate 3-week segments, one right after the track season and one right after the cross-country season. Just sort of depends on your situation. You might have a situation where you want to give, maybe you're living up in the northern part of the country and you want to give the entire month of December off because of travel reasons, holidays, and that kind of thing, right after maybe some of those big national meets like Nike or New Balance or that type of thing. That might work for you. Maybe it's half of December, half of January, whatever it is. For me, for track, because our state meet normally would have ended right here, but our state meet, like most state meets, are canceled, so I'm adjusting, and in a perfect world, this is the way it would work. So the weeks off from running are here, here, and here. All right, so this is the transition period. This is the little to no activity. So don't tell your kids to be bedridden. I mean, they can still out and be kids. You know, obviously at this point we have to be social distancing and all of that to be safe. But you know, if you had a situation where maybe you had a kid that had a big family and they wanted to go play ultimate frisbee or something like that, that was just, you know, maybe go out and just ride the bike or something like that, that's perfectly fine. But when I'm talking about little to no running, I'm talking about little to no formal training, right? Nothing that's really in a formal fashion where you're giving them percentages or times or anything like that, right? And that would go for 2 weeks. Let them rest, let them recover. These changes in the body structures that we've been eliciting throughout the previous macro cycle, they're really energy expensive, and when you're dealing with kids that are still growing and maturing and all that, they need time off. Now, this would be different for a college kid that's more close to full maturity, or somebody that's out of high school or something like that. This is dealing with what a kid in high school would need, and they need a little bit more time off in the school year, or in the regular year, I should say. Now, the second week would be the third week off from anything running. This is where I would recommend having them start doing some lifting and some core type work. They can do core work really in and around here. And actually, I put trunk work here. I think it's more important to think of things in terms of trunk type strength, hip strength, the whole part of your upper body, you know, posture and things like that. Things that really focus in on that strength, not just abdominals with crunching that kind of puts you in a bad position in terms of mechanics. You don't really want to be hunched over when you're running, so you don't want a lot of your core and trunk work to be just crunches over and over again. You want to do some different things that get more posture that's really more effective for running. And I would say maybe about 3 times a week. I would say make sure it's on your own. If you've got brand new runners, this would still be typically during a normal school year, so I wouldn't really have new runners. I mean, I'm going to pick up some at the end of the year always, but these would be kids that have been going through. They know what the lifting plan is. Most of the kids that we deal with have either a gym membership or they have like a neighborhood type thing they can go to. So this would be simply something they can do on their own. And then this next week, which starts, I call this a transitionary week, but this is week 1 of training. You could maybe call this week 1 of general prep, in which case general prep would actually make another week longer. But the reason why I'm making this as a transitional week is all this is also going to be done on their own. You know, you ask a lot of the time from these kids, and if you're dealing with kids that are coming back, if you've done your job in terms of coaching them, they can do these things on their own. They don't need to meet up and do this. They can do it just for their own purpose if they like to have a running buddy, as long as they're in similar fitness level to where they're running the same type of intensity for them where they are right then. They can do that, but there's no real reason to say, all right guys, all 30 of us are going to get together at one park and we're all going to do this 20 to 30 minute run. There's no real reason for them to have to get together to do that. Just they can go from their house and do whatever in a safe fashion. So transition week, it's going to add some easy runs, and they're going to keep lifting on their own. The way I would segment this is kind of as an every other day. They're going from low activity to a little bit more moderate activity. So the first day, 20 to 30 minutes easy with 4 medium strides after. Striding afterwards, I could probably do a whole video on it, but this is not because of speed. This is just to fix some running mechanics. I don't tell them to race this. Don't go as fast as possible. This is almost like a tempo pace, to steal an idea that we're going to talk about a little bit later. Just 50 to 80 meters after, just think about mechanics, arm carriage, knee drive, upright posture, good breathing. Walk back afterwards so that they're not developing any acid, so that they're maybe getting about, 90 seconds, 2 minutes maybe in between as they're walking back from this. And the next day they could do a lift and some trunk work. And come back the next day, 20 to 30 minutes, same thing as what they did on Monday, and then same thing they did on Tuesday, and then come back with 20 to 30 minutes, and then Saturday. So they've done something every single day here except for Sunday. This would be typically for a high school boy maybe about a 10-mile week. So they're going from 0 miles, 0 miles, 0 miles out to about maybe 10 miles or so, maybe 8 to 10 miles, depending on if they go on the low end. Most of my kids, when I give them this, they'll probably go about 30 minutes each time. But it's perfectly fine to go on the young. You're just trying to wake things up. So say maybe 8 to 10 miles, because you're going from an hour to an hour and a half, something like that. Just very, very easy stuff along with the strides and everything afterwards. So that's the first week that you would kind of do it. The only one I'm going to really talk about in general here. What I'm going to do here now is I'm going to show you the rest of the weeks where this would line up throughout the months, and then I'll talk about some of the workouts that are important in this phase. So you got general prep week 1 that starts the first week of June, you could say. It's just the week we were just looking at. General prep 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So we're now through July. And then August, we've got general prep 10 and 11. So if you add in that transitionary week, we have 12 weeks for this phase that we're talking about here, general prep. As I mentioned, we've got a 23 weeks to the state meet. So general prep takes about half the calendar, half the actual year. If we talked about from the slides previously, the idea being that this takes twice as long as the anaerobic system, 20 plus weeks. That kind of makes a lot of sense that this is half of the calendar, right? A lot of times you'll see textbooks that'll talk about maybe a 10-week general prep phase. I mentioned this in the previous video, but the reason why I don't really do a lot of that is I extend my general prep out 1 more week, only because this happens to fall on the first week of school, and I don't want to do anything new, do anything crazy for them on the first week of school just as they're adapting. So I don't wait to I don't change things for specific prep type workouts until the second week, which also happens to be the week of our first meet, which makes sense because this changes the game. This is a change in shift in philosophy. You may want to do it a week before if this first meet is important to you. This one is not important to me. It's just sort of a wake-up call for everybody, so that's how it all kind of works. So The first 12 weeks of the 23-week cycle, just about half of the season, is going to be dedicated to general prep. So what kind of workouts would we be dealing with in general prep? What kind of workouts would we be dealing with in this general preparatory phase? So workouts in the general preparatory phase, I'm going to talk about 3 different types: critically important, important, and not important. Okay, and then I'll come back with a video for each of these types. Really just the critical and the important, and the not important, we'll come back and talk about them when we're in the phases that warrant those type of workouts. So these will each get their own specific video. Critically important, the long run. I would say the single most important workout of the cross-country microcycle is the long run, okay? Followed very closely by the VO2 max run. Dedicated workouts that train the VO2 max system. When I say VO2 max, it just means that it's run right at VO2 max. The long run is going to train this, and we'll talk about that in the videos specifically. But most important, second most important, but not by a lot. This is like 1 and then 1A. I would say in the track season, when you're dealing maybe with the 2 mile, it would be the VO2 max run is the most important, followed by the long run. So just the kind of the shift in the distance here changes that a little bit. And recovery runs, right, which is the same intensity as a long run, but shorter. These workouts are vitally important to success in developing the key factors needed for success in the 5K, and these need to be in every microcycle, okay? Microcycle length we'll talk about. I typically in this part of the season do about 7 days because there are fewer workout types. When you get later on, you're going to get some of these not important workouts to become important, so your microcycle is going to change. But these need to be in every single week, every single microcycle, and you're going to have multiple recovery runs, and we'll show you why when we start planning those out on a calendar. Very important, still very important workouts, hill or strength type runs, and there's different ones you would do at different parts of the year. You're dealing with short hill intervals in this phase, and then it'll build up to medium hills and long hills later on in the season, and I'll do videos on each of those. And the one that talks about all of them, the alactic run. This is for that 4% energy, that undefined, and the hill runs also help the alactic system. I'll explain those, but these are short bursts that get your muscles firing quickly in a synchronized fashion and give you that spring back. And then the tempo run, lactic threshold run. This is important. We'll talk about this in a subsequent video. I do think people do way too much of this, though, but it is important. If it wasn't important, we wouldn't be doing it, but it's not critically important. These workouts are still very important to XC 5K success, but less so than the critical ones. And the ones that are not important should be no surprise. It's that energy system that we said is not important to deal with at this point in the season. Special endurance or fast running, glycolytic running, intensive tempo, slightly slower but still glycolytic, and extensive tempo. The easiest of these 3 workout intensities, but still producing acid. These workouts, excuse me. These workouts trigger improvements in the anaerobic glycolytic system by producing acid, starting the 9 to 11 week peak, and can reduce overall aerobic development. So if we have 9 to 11 weeks to peak, and maybe you can hold it for 13 weeks, maybe. I have it set up to where it's right in this 11 weeks is where the state meet is. Actually 12 weeks, because you can hold it for 2 weeks. So I have it to where it'll be about 12 weeks. So even those early peakers or those smaller window peakers still can benefit. But the idea being is if you started these workouts that take 9 to 11 weeks to maximize, and then maybe 13 before you start going downward, because this system does go downward after a period of time, you're going to peak too early, right? You start these in June, you're peaked out in mid-August, you're maybe coming out running great, and then you're just not great at the end of the season. This might be why. You start this too early. Also, acid, it does hurt some of the aerobic developments we're trying to get to, right? So mitochondria hate acid, and there's different things in your body that just hate acid. So you don't want to start this energy production, this system, too quickly, or you're going to miss the window. The idea is to peak in fact, I'm going to go back to this. If this takes 9 to 11 weeks to peak, and this takes 20 plus weeks to peak, the idea of starting these workouts first, and these workouts second, is so that this is peaked at the same time that this is peaked. You start these at the same time, this is going to peak in mid-August, this is going to peak in November, and now you've got a system where you never really showed your true strength, your true potential, because you didn't time things right. So that's the idea of starting the aerobic system workouts quickly or early. The alactic system, because it's undefined. This system is interesting in that it doesn't really go through peaking windows to where things go downward. You can kind of train this sort of throughout the year. So in the next video, what we'll do is we will go back through those different workouts we talked about, the critical, the important, and we won't deal with the not so important in this phase, and I'll break each of them down in their own videos, starting with a VO2 max test video, which counts as a VO2 max run, and we'll see how we can use that to set up workouts going forward. Then we'll go to long run, recovery runs, hill runs, alactic runs, and tempo runs, and build out this whole macro cycle and kind of show you where you might put these in a normal microcycle. So if you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing. If you found it helpful, maybe think about sharing it around. Please, please, please subscribe if you did like this, because I put out videos about 3-4 times a week about running if you're a running nerd like me. If you found this helpful, please, please, please subscribe. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.